Hello, everyone, and happy CSN week. It's lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us on this lovely Thursday. We are so honored to be able to present the results from a recent landscape survey of pre-K to 12 computer science teachers in the United States that we did in partnership between AiiCE, CSTA, and the Kapor Center. So again, just thanks for being here. So my name is Bryan Twarek, or BT. It's my initials, and I'm Director of Education for CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association. My colleague and the lead author on the report is Dr. Sonia Koshy from the Kapor Center. There, she is the Chief Research Officer. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, BT.
Absolutely. CSTA and the Kapor Center represent members of AiiCE, and AiiCE is an acronym that stands for the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education, which we'll reference throughout, but it is a cross-sector partnership that's working to disrupt the inequitable access and inclusion of students traditionally marginalized in computer science from the K-12 and post-secondary systems level. We also want to acknowledge that we did this in partnership with many, many people, and there are other authors of the report, including Dr. DaQuan Bashir, Shaina Glass, Rachel Goins, Lisa Cruz-Vataski, and Dr. Allison Scott. So here's our plan for today. We are looking to share the main findings from our report with you. And we will also include recommendations. We have 5 key recommendations for how to act on the findings with some specific action items and aligned resources. And my favorite part is we'll have a panel discussion with 4 incredible people that will be taking about just over half of our time today. So our report is called Moving Towards a Vision of Equitable Computer Science. And I'd like to turn over to Dr. Koshy to say more.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next page, BT. Great. So again, this is our second time running the survey across the US. And this time we added some new questions based on some of our learnings from the first round. And so this time we had about 84 items that covered everything from demographics of the teachers and schools to teachers' perceptions of how satisfied they were with their current teaching status, the curriculum, and also we wanted to learn more about their instructional practice and their cultural competence in terms of what they are actually offering when they're in the classroom with students. And finally, we also had a set of questions about perceptions of incorporating culturally responsive pedagogy and also their level of professional development. This year, we were able to get a little over 2,238 pre-K to 12 CS teachers across the US between May and July. And now we are going to present our findings. So next page, next slide. All right. And so what we really learned this year and who we were able to get as respondents, not surprisingly, we saw that the teacher demographics within computer science is not as diverse as the classroom students. And so we have this year 54% of women, 68% who are white, and about 91% who are able-bodied. And when we're looking at the types of pathways that these computer science teachers come from, they have very different backgrounds in terms of not everyone has a computer science or technical science degree as their background. There's folks that have industry experience. They also have other educational credentials, and then they chose and opted to get their computer science credential as well. So you'll see that it spans across, and there's also variations depending on whether they're teaching at the elementary school level or the middle and high school level. Next page. What we'll see is, again, trying to get this large swath of teacher experiences. We wanted to really target the different types of contexts that that teachers come from. So whether that is school populations with elementary, middle, and high school, as well as the type of communities that teachers are within. So this year with the survey, we were able to get 50% of our 50% of our teachers came from schools that were serving higher income levels. And then when it came to serving Black, Latin, Native, and Pacific Islander populations, we had 29% of our teachers who served higher populations of those students in comparison to lower populations. We also got a span of classroom contexts, so everything from integrated and standalone classrooms in the pre-K-8 settings, all the way into high schools where we had intro as well as specialized computing and AP courses offered. Next slide. So what did we find with these teachers' voices? Next slide. One of the key findings that we had were around resources and support. And I think that this is unsurprising to many who have been in this space for years, which is that teachers who are serving lower income school communities felt limited by their opportunities to collaborate with their peers, and also identified fewer resources and professional support to be successful in the classroom. One thing that was notable this year was, one more click, BT. When it came to feeling a part of the community, we saw a difference between being the only when it came to income levels of the school community. So when it became within the higher income schools, 29% of the teachers were the only within their school community, meaning the sole computer science teacher within that school, in comparison to 40% at lower income schools. So thinking about collaboration and the opportunity to learn from peers, that was less likely and became more of a challenge for those lower income schools. Next slide. The next finding was around teacher agency. I think that what we saw with the teachers' voices was that they felt a lot more agency and more confidence in being able to promote equitable computer science at their school level. So 74% of teachers were able to, felt that they could promote equitable CS in their school, but that fell drastically when it came to kind of the broader scope, either at the district level where only 56% of teachers felt confident, and at the state level where only 44% felt confident. Next slide. And then this new term, and I know the panelists will discuss this in more detail, is this concept of identity inclusive pedagogy. So thinking about how is it that we are embedding content that is discussing a variety of topics like digital citizenship, impacts of computing, ethics, and also accessibility. Less than half of teachers currently cover identity inclusive computing topics. And then when it came to, well, is it just a coverage issue, or is it also like their comfort level with respect to being able to offer it if they had the resources and the material? And about a third of teachers felt that they lacked confidence to be able to provide some of these key pedagogical and curricular material to their students. So you'll see that 65% of teachers felt like they could motivate students who showed low interest in computer science. Similarly, about a third lacked confidence in offering culturally relevant pedagogy to support student learning, and similarly using topics of inequities as a tool in computer science classrooms. So there's still some professional development work to be done with respect to these key topic areas. And I am going to hand it off to BT.
Thank you. So we asked a number of questions about that gathered respondents who are pre-K-12 computer science teachers in the United States. What are your primary challenges to teaching computer science and promoting equity in computer science? And here are the top challenges we noted. First was a lack of academic priority in contrast to core subjects like math and English language arts. Second, a lack of support, interest, or knowledge, specifically by the administrators at their school or district and the counselors. Third were scheduling constraints with offering computer science courses. Fourth was having too many preps or other responsibilities. Fifth, a lack of student interest or enrollment. Oftentimes that was connected to those scheduling constraints and to the lack of support by counselors and administrators. And last, a lack of resources, hardware, software, curriculum resources in order to implement. Another kind of key area is teachers' perceptions around the importance of computer science. Nearly all computer science teachers believe that computer science instruction should be a universal experience for all pre-K-12 computer science students. And here are a few items related to that. 94% reported they feel that learning computer science is important to all students, regardless of their identity. 85% believe that CS should be a graduation requirement at the high school level. And 86% believe that computer science should be as important as math or English language arts. So those are some of the findings. We have more listed in the full report, which we'll showcase at the end. We want to spend more time on what are the recommendations and what would we say based on those findings. So our first recommendation, I'd like to lead with this quote. There are not enough teachers in the field reflective of this population. Reflection of self is critical for students to listen, pay attention, and relate to subject matter. People believe in others that look like them as a means to achieve and excel in life in all areas. This speaks to the need to diversify the pool of CS teachers as well as to expand it. And this is important because there are not enough CS teachers and we're losing a lot of teachers. This is a broader problem and it's been exacerbated by the pandemic and all of the issues around that where lots of teachers are thinking about leaving the profession. We also know from this data that Dr. Koshy shared that CS teachers are predominantly white and they roughly represent the teaching workforce at large, but we know that is in contrast to the diversity of pre-K-12 students in those schools. So how can people act on this? Well, we believe this is a policy issue and that policymakers need to develop incentive structures to recruit, retain, and diversify the pool of CS teachers. And some examples of that are loan forgiveness and stipends for hard-to-staff positions. And we also think that pre-service CS teacher programs and programs designed specifically to attract and prepare more Black, Latinx, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander teachers is critical. Second recommendation, teacher in California said, we need to make CS a graduation requirement. Right now, the students have so many core classes and only have a limited amount of electives they can take. They do not have much CS experience coming to high school, so many of them lack the knowledge or exposure to CS, which makes it challenging for them to really want to take CS compared to subjects they already enjoy. Our line recommendation is to prioritize computer science as a core subject with universal participation throughout pre-K-12 education. So this is important because in a recent study that co-authored with Code.org and AiiCE, we reported that just over half of high schools in the US offer computer science classes, but still only a small fraction of students participate. And we know there's very wide disparities in who participates. To counteract that, CS instruction needs to start in elementary and extend through high school, and it needs to give the same priority as core subjects. And this isn't to say that this for all approach, universal approach, is the only thing, because unless we have an intentional lens on the most marginalized populations, we will likely still see disparities. So it is a kind of both and approach. It is, we need this universal kind of requirement, and we need to maintain targeted programs and views. So how people can take action. Teachers can help get buy-in from administrators by helping them learn more about computer science and join PD. We have some resources for that. Administrators can support counselors and think about what are the recruitment pathways into courses that are elective. Policymakers can create requirements for universal participation, like high school graduation requirements, or having, like New York City does, required experiences per grade band. It's also important to consider what's required in order to make this accessible to everyone. So the technology and the curriculum has to be accessible to students with disabilities as well. And there needs to be funding that accompanies these things. Let's move on to our third one. Don't think you can scrimp on personnel and their training and ongoing support, as this is 10 times more important than any hardware or software you buy. Whew. So this speaks to the need for ongoing training for computer science teachers. There's been lots of investments in initial training for computer science teachers, but it doesn't stop because most computer science teachers are newish to the discipline. That's one of our findings. And so they need ongoing support. And we know that all teachers benefit from ongoing training. So it's important that leaders commit to prioritizing ongoing PD as a necessity, and that those options include free and low cost things. So teachers should be finding those opportunities. Administrators should be allocating funding for the PD and helping their teachers attend those. Policymakers need to allocate funding for both the initial and the ongoing PD. And we also need more providers to create ongoing PD programs and supports for teachers. Number 4, a teacher from Washington said, we need materials to support more diverse learning needs and cultural interests that map with diversity of student voice. This speaks to the need for identity inclusive computing. And so our recommendation here is to provide curriculum, resources, and training that are aligned with identity inclusive topics and approaches. We know, what Dr. Koshy wrote, stated, that teachers lack the confidence in developing equitable CS classroom experiences, even though they want to. So teachers, we know that a large percentage, 71%, are already seeking out equity inclusion focused PD. We need to expand what those are and help connect teachers to quality programming. Administrators need to have a lens for curriculum that are culture responsive and accessible and include identity inclusive computing content like ethics, impacts of computing, accessibility. Final recommendation. From Nebraska, a teacher says, I am the only person in my district that teaches computer science, so building a strong professional learning network would be beneficial. Having this group that you would feel comfortable asking questions and building knowledge with would be vital. This speaks to the need to connect CS teachers to collaborative communities. This is especially important because we know that most CS teachers have 0 to 1 other CS teaching colleagues at their schools. And so that means that the kind of common collaboration structures like departments just generally do not exist. And so they need to collaborate outside of the school community in many cases. So teachers can join things like their CSTA regional chapter and virtual communities and affinity groups. We need administrators to support that collaboration among teachers. And curriculum providers, you can also support these communities. And we have a community for you as well at CSTA as part of our AiiCE projects. I'd like to kind of end this recommendation section with part of the conclusion from the report. It reads, we must collectively commit to expanding and better equipping the current CS teacher workforce before we can realize a technology ecosystem that is more just and more reflective of society. So with that, I'm excited to talk about this in greater depth with some experts. And so we are going to transition into a panel discussion with 4 amazing people. I invite you to join on screen by kind of clicking on your camera. First, we have Dr. Allison Scott, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kapor Center, where she leads research, policy, and programming to enhance diversity and inclusion throughout the technology ecosystem. She is co-PI of the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education and co-director for Computer Science for California, or CS4CA. Welcome, Dr. Scott. Uh, Maria Camarena is a secondary computer science teacher at the Maywood Center for Enriched Studies in the Los Angeles Unified School District. She established a CS pathway at her school while providing universal access and disrupting inequities, particularly for her girls and Latinx students. She received the 2020 Teaching Excellence Award in Computer Science, as well as last year, she received the NC Witt National Educator Award. She's a current CSTA Equity Fellow. Shaina Glass is the Senior Professional Learning Manager at CSTA, where she leads policy, PD, and standards. She's been in education for the last 16 years, educating students and teachers alike. Prior to joining CSTA, she worked for the Aldine Independent School District in Texas to expand equitable access to STEM and computer science to over 65,000 students. She's also the president of CSTA Greater Houston. And Dr. DaQuan Bashir is the Professional Learning Manager at CSTA, where he leads teacher PD and mentoring. He is a seasoned mathematics and CS educator, working for a number of school and nonprofit organizations throughout the New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania tri-state area, including the Microsoft Philanthropy TEALS program. He and Shaina manage the CSTA Equity Fellowship program. With that, I welcome you on screen, and I'm excited to turn it over to you all. There you are. Hello. What an amazing panel. Okay, so our report is titled Moving Toward a Vision of Equitable Computer Science, but we didn't cover what that vision of equitable computer science covers. So now it's on you. Marie, can you kick us off? What do you think?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for having me. I wanted to give you a little preface to what I envision as equity in computer science for my community. I come from, I'm in the local area in east side of LA. We are the second largest district, and we have approximately 70% Hispanic Latino community, the entire district. When I was given the information, the opportunity to teach computer science, I found that less than 10% of students that were Hispanic, Latino, or Black were taking AP computer science classes. And computer science was non-existent in my community. So at that time, I realized that in order for me to even bring classes and access to computer science to my community, I needed to focus on exposure. So exposure to me needed to be based on the fact that I needed to provide interest for my students. And I wanted to share a couple of things that I did. So I started with my first Girl Supports Club. I started making connections with my students, talking about summer programs that they can take. And it was all around this idea of building interest. Because without interest, I can't have a course. I can offer a course, classes will not be filled. From there to me, in order for me to expand this equitable computer science program, I needed to now provide access. And it was not only access to content, so envision a pathway of where my students were going to go. So if I'm going to offer this class, what's going to happen next? So if they finish that class, where are they going to go? But then I also needed to connect them to the workforce, and I needed them to see that they can see themselves in someone else. So at this point, I also brought individuals. I was blessed to make connections with Nuevo Foundation, which is an organization that focuses on bringing individuals in the computer science field to come and talk to our students. So they were able to talk to Microsoft engineers and see themselves, because these were individuals of Latinx heritage. And from there, I was like, okay, well, now I have the interest, the access. So now how do I bring this all together? And to me, it was opportunities. So I needed to provide opportunities for my students to learn new skills that will expand beyond just them thinking about majoring in a course, majoring in computer science, but things that they will take on beyond just the class. I needed also for them to see that they could become advocates, because like you all mentioned, I'm just one teacher. I'm blessed to have another partner here, but our students are the biggest advocates for computer science. They are the ones leading the way right now. This week, they're the ones that put everything together for Computer Science Education Week, but this has been a work of now 7 years. So to me, it all comes down to what the community needs. But for my community, I needed to provide access, exposure before access, and then opportunities along the way was what ultimately brought the equitable computer science pathway that we currently have here at AiiCE.
I love that, Maria. I love that it's not, I feel like often in the community we focus on just access or just like kind of the starting and not the broader picture, and that it's grounded in community. I'd like to go to Dr. Scott because she authored with colleagues at Kapor Center a framework for culturally responsive computer science education. And that's the definition for equitable computer science that we relied on in the report. Can you expand on what you defined in this framework?
So thanks, VT. And just kind of building off of where Maria left off, really love the title of this report, which is moving towards a vision of equitable computer science. So our history in the space, for those of you who know our work, really started from like a data perspective. So we were gathering data around like, what does access look like? And it was heavily focused on like demonstrating where disparities existed for communities like Maria's and communities like ours here in Oakland, and really calling attention to the challenges just related to like offering computer science at all, and have been kind of like steadily beating this drum with partners and colleagues like you all around, it's not just access, right? So yes, we need access, but we need much more than that. And so last year, as you mentioned, in collaboration with a bunch of colleagues and advisors, and relying on, you know, a ton of research from experts in the field, we published a framework on culturally responsive sustaining computer science, which really the definition is we want to ensure that students' interests, identities, and cultures are embraced and validated, that students develop knowledge of computing content and its utility in the world, that strong CS identities are developed, and that students engage in larger socio-political critiques about technology's purpose, potential, and impact. So really excited to see the data in the report around how current CS teachers are starting to think about the ways that they're connecting computer science content to you know, relevant issues in communities and to the broader social impacts of technology. And so yeah, just in sum, moving towards a vision of equitable computer science has to include, exactly as Maria said, not just access, but true inclusion, which we believe culturally responsive computer science is one strategy to get us there.
Thanks. So another thing we talked about in the report, we mentioned several times, was the use of identity inclusive computing, both in terms of content and practices or approaches. And that's a newish coined term that came as part of this Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education, led by Drs. Nikki Washington and Shaina Daly. Can you expand on that? Like, what does identity inclusive computing look like? Why is it important? Shaina, Dr. Bashir, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be on this panel with all of these beautiful faces and these beautiful humans. To just expand on both what Allison and Maria were saying, it is more so in preparation for our teachers to be prepared to have those conversations around their own biases and also their own identity, starting with understanding who you are so that you can model and support that with your students. Understanding that discrimination does exist and that the challenges that we as adults face, our students face that in more deeper magnitude. So including that into the content that you're teaching, using those examples and targeting the impacts of computing. We have lots of different resources that that we at CSTA alongside AiiCE, and I'm sharing that now. We are expanding our professional learning opportunities for teachers, realizing not just from this survey, but just from the work that we've been doing since we're talking about making progress and how we're moving forward in CS, how we see the lack. And alongside Kapor and all of our other partners, that's a part of this alliance. In identity inclusive computing, we are trying to develop and support teachers where we know that they are. So starting with a self-examination for yourself first, to then be able to support and model that for your students, to show them alongside that we hear you and we want to make sure that what you are learning is representative of your community, where you are, your families, and how that can also be a benefit, how you can still stay where you are and use computing to impact your community. That's a start.
Yeah, and hello everyone. Happy Computer Science Education Week. And just to piggyback off of what Shaina is saying, when we think about being inclusive, right, it should be something that is happening in all facets, whether it's in teaching or in practice. We were talking as a community, I want to say it was like last week, and I brought up the idea of the Hippocratic Oath, right? And how doctors have to do that and say, you know, at first do no harm. With the way things are going with technology and the way that you know, things are changing and all of the software that's immediately having impacts on our lives, I wish there was something like that that existed amongst engineers. And this is one of the reasons why, as educators, we should be talking about these things with our students, because some of these students, not to say all of them, but some of the students that we do educate, they will grow up to be the next software engineers and developers, and they're going to be responsible for writing these lines of code. So having that understanding, having that lens, having that thought in the back of their minds, let me make sure that what I'm making, what I'm creating is as inclusive as possible to everyone who's going to use this, is quite important. So that's what I have to say on this subject.
I think it's such a brilliant idea of like reimagining what is the competence required to be that, as well as like their responsibility to society, because often it's just considered divorced and like a bonus or something else, and that's just like not okay. Beautifully said, Dr. Bashir. I think we're going to move on to our next question. So you can see this, I have this CS Ed Week background here. Happy CS Ed Week, like Bashir said. Our theme this year is celebrating progress in the path ahead. So I'd like to focus on the first half of that theme around celebrating progress. Given kind of what we shared around findings and what you know from your experience, what progress do we have to celebrate from the last few years?
I'm happy to go first to break the silence. So a couple quick points. As a researcher, I mean, I think one thing that's exciting is that this is the second CS teacher landscape survey. And I think just having more data and more information on an ongoing basis about the CS teacher landscape is super valuable. So then also for folks who are joining who actually participated in the survey, like huge shout out and thanks to you for contributing to this knowledge that is literally going to help continue to inform the field and even things like how we consider policy change. I think there were a couple of highlights for me in the report that felt like progress. So one was that like over 70% of CS teachers are seeking out professional development opportunities specifically around this like building skills in equitable and inclusive classrooms. And I think that's like a that seems like a big win. And we know, like knowing that CS teachers are hungry for the content to do the things in classrooms like Dr. Bashir just mentioned. And the other piece that I thought was really interesting was that this was a data point that Dr. Koshy mentioned, about half of teachers are currently incorporating topics like ethics and the social impacts of computing. We still have, 50% to go, but I think the fact that, half of teachers are starting to have these conversations feels like an evolution in the space. So a couple of my perspectives.
So I want to jump in and say this may not be the most popular, but the number of CS teachers we're reaching, the fact that we have expanded our reach and that it's a conversation and actually impacting policy, the fact that so many states are now being more inclusive and actually having supports to actually be the voice for CS teachers across the United States is a tremendous jump from where we were. I know lots of different organizations are celebrating this 10-year mark, right? We've done 10 years of this and we've done 10 years of that. We're pushing 10 years of clubs or whatever it may be. But think about where we were and where we are and how we're trying to impact what we're providing to specifically CS teachers. That is monumental. So want to call out that humongous progress. Of course, as teachers and educators, as Allison just stated, we still have leaps and bounds to go, but we're creating the road and the path to build more. Before there was no road. Now at least we're on the road and we see how we can direct that path.
Yeah, and just to add in, just thinking about over the last couple of years, the opportunities for students themselves to also engage in computer science concepts. They've come from a wider range of avenues and opportunities and folks wanting students to participate and offer exposure in that regard. I think that's a really great point, and something that has happened as of recently, which is positive.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, this actually came from one of my students. So they created a video this past week for Computer Science Education Week, and basically he said last year our theme was CS everywhere. And he stated this was our wake-up call. So now we see like students and teachers are being vested not only in bringing computer science. I, as a teacher, I'm vested in bringing and advocating for computer science, not only for my school, for my community. I think we're seeing that reach and connecting to other CS teachers through CSTA, at least for me, has been a gut and a blessing that I did not have before. So I think it's a wake-up call, and now we're moving forward. So the question is now, how do we now support everyone who might be at different stages?
Woo, woo. Great questions. I want to highlight two things I saw in chat just now. One is from Dr. Alexis Martin, who commented that our first landscape survey was administered as COVID hit. And we looked at how many teachers paused computer science instruction. And I feel like, honestly, the fact that we did not continue to backslide, but have seen growth is a huge accomplishment, because just to keep it pedaling is a lot of work, especially with the churn in teachers and all of the work that's required to keep it going. So I think that's an accomplishment. And Dan Levitt commented on the creating tools and the infrastructure that's been created. I feel like the fact that the culture responsive sustaining education framework exists is a great achievement. Now we have things to point to that say, here is a synthesis of research that says, how do we actually do this? Because oftentimes research is disconnected from practice. Research is disconnected from practice, and we need it kind of spelled out. And how does this connect? How do we put these things together? So I feel like tools like that, and then the tools that Shaina White's creating for helping curriculum providers and teachers in assessing how are they meeting or working towards that framework, I think is absolutely the right step. So now on to the second half of that theme, which is the path ahead. Where is that path the longest? What are some of our challenges in moving towards that vision of equitable computer science that you all articulated?
Allison, you're off mute first. I was like,
you want me to kick it off? Okay, happy to go. So I think, and this is really well, I think, spelled out and articulated in the recommendations around how do we think about building a diverse and robust CS teacher pipeline, and also invest heavily in the sustained ongoing coaching, learning, and professional development. It seems like we are making progress in that direction, but there's a lot of work to be done. And especially, I think, BT, you might have mentioned this at the outset about looking at the landscape of teaching in general, and teacher preparation programs, and just looking at the incentive structures for teachers and how are we actually supporting teachers, whether it's pay or professional learning. I think that it is both, in my opinion, the biggest challenge and the place that we should prioritize the most of our work moving forward, in my opinion.
So I'm going to piggyback off of that. Being that my focus is professional learning, I'm hearing this in ecosystems across the country right now. What is professional learning going to look like? What is professional development when it comes to the value for the next generation teacher or educator? What is that going to look like moving forward? There's this shift. How do we make sure that administrators see the value in providing quality, inclusive professional development that is being holding everyone to the fire, basically, pretty much. So we kind of lightly or briefly described or defined identity inclusive computing, but more so in the classroom, how are we identifying or defining that for our students through our teachers? You know, I don't have the answer, but this is the long path forward. We have to transition public education and how we support teachers from the way it was from our forefathers. Not even gonna say my grandfather. I'm not gonna say the previous, I'm gonna say the when education began. We have to shift from that to be able to further prepare the teachers and students of this, I don't even want to say next generation, because it's so urgent and it's so in the now, this shift, that all of us are paying attention to. Everyone on this call, Maria as a teacher, us in our roles, we're trying to figure out the best way to be held accountable, to support teachers, and to make that impact in their classrooms.
And if I may, I think when we're talking about supporting teachers, also focusing on curriculum pieces, and with curriculum providers, you know, holding their feet to the fire, for lack of a better expression, using the one that Shaina just used, so that they are revising and detailing and curtailing their curriculum so that it is more identity inclusive. So students are now being able to activate some type of response to the curriculum because they see symbols or people or hear things that are relevant to their experiences or how they identify. I think moving forward, that's something that, and I know there's, you know, curriculum providers that are looking at these things, but you know, we need to definitely continue to push them to actually start to put these things in practice, and reaching out to the communities of whoever they need to talk to, so they're getting the information, so it's not just kind of a piecemeal put together type of thing, but it's done intentionally, so that students can get the best education possible.
And then just to jump last thing, as a teacher, I think for myself, I'm still learning about being inclusive and in my classroom. So definitely would like to see more work put into the computer science communities, whether they're virtual or in person, just to continue to build that connection between teachers across countries, across the states and countries, because we are international now in CSTA. But definitely hearing for myself from other teachers, their struggles, it has been very useful for my practice. And I think that's what we need to continue doing, building those communities.
Something that I find a big challenge is there's a pretty sizable number of teachers who do not believe that topics of inequity should have a place in the CS classroom. One of the findings is that 31% of CS teachers don't believe issues of racism, sexism, ableism, other inequities should be discussed in CS classrooms. Why is this important? And how do we convince that group of teachers?
If I may. I see you unmuted, Shaina. If you want to go first, I can wait. just to go back to my point of, well, there's a lot that goes into this, but one of those is that curriculum piece. Because in the curriculum, the teachers, they're going to have to talk about it in some shape or form, or they're just going to kind of veer away, but that's a whole nother conversation. So it can definitely exist within that curriculum that they're going to be using. And then, that PD that those teachers are getting, having deeper conversations around these subjects as well. And then, it'll take some mapping out in order to do that. But it goes back to the top point that I was trying to make. Our students are going to be the individuals writing the software and codes and things that we're going to be using today, tomorrow, in the future, right? And if they're not exposed to these conversations, they just might not know, right? And it's not to say that they're going to deliberately do these things, they really just might not know. And it can be a continuation of things that are already happening, right? Where people they're not being recognized by facial scanning technologies just because of the hue of their skin, things like that. So it's super important, if not for us currently right now as adults, but for our students in the generation to come.
So I want to address one of the parts of the question on how do we convince these teachers that this is important. I'm honored that I got to participate or be a part of the Power On curriculum resources. Using this as an example. The issue is we all are from different parts of the country. And even when I was a teacher, every child in my class was not me, meaning they did not identify as a female. They were not all Black. We all are different. We are a melting pot of this country. However, to convince you, and as you all are educators in this space, we don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. Students are going to question. They ask you questions. You don't have all the answers. It's important that you include the topics that affect and impact the community in which the students you serve live, so that they can be able to answer those questions that we may not have the answer to. It's not that we are superheroes. We have that cape, but that does not mean that Spider-Man and Superman know the answer to everything. They're still trying to find the kryptonite. You have to know your limitations, and it's okay. It's okay to let go of the fear that the student may know more than you. If they have a question, that's where we come in to help you know how to guide them to find the answer. You can find it together, but to convince you that your students exist should be that they're in your class. And we can do this together. You're not alone. So the convincing part is just looking at the faces in your room. Knowing that everyone is different. And we are here the same way we in this space right now are here to help you facilitate and learn how to support the students. You are there to facilitate and help them learn how to become those problem solvers, to solve those problems.
Beautifully stated, Shaina. The only other thing I would add, and this goes back to Dr. Bashir's point as well, is I think we need to integrate these topics and these frameworks and discussions of equity across everything that we're doing. So yes to curriculum, yes to teacher preparation at the pre-service level, standards. I think there's discussions about revising some of the standards, but clearly articulating how this is incorporated in computing education, and not just like an add-on or a nice to have or something that some teachers do because they have some expertise or some interest in the space.
All right. Bradford Harris asked, is it the teachers we need to convince, or is it the leader that we need to convince so the teacher can do it, or is it both? Anyone want to give a quick response here?
I'll jump in because I had to do both. I think it's when we talk about computer science being inclusive and equitable, it's a community affair. So when you go and talk to your administrators, you go with an intention. You bring facts. You bring everything that you're going to need that is going to support your point to bargain. But then also, as a teacher, you need to include other teachers. So whatever events you have them come into your classroom. If you have questions yourself that you do not know how to answer, you reach out to those teachers and start building this community. I call it my CS community because ultimately all of us are in this together, and it's going to take the effort of every stakeholder in order for us to bring computer science, especially to communities like mine that lack that access to begin with.
So we are running out of time, sadly. I know. So I want to move towards our conclusion. What's something you most want us to remember, and what action do you think is most needed?
So it's going to be a twofer for me. It's definitely from one of the questions that's in the chat too, about, do you think it's important to start a chapter? Like, what if we don't have a chapter in our area? What if I'm not connected to do exactly what Maria just stated? One of the biggest things that I think to move forward to create this action is to further prepare teachers to be advocates for CS. Understanding where you are to in that lane or that path of advocacy is important. So on the new website that's released, it's ways that you can take action. And one of those suggestions is to make sure that you are a member of CSTA so that we can create those channels or those places for you to get the support so that you understand how to be that advocate for computer science. And there's different levels of that, right? You can be that advocate in your school. You can rally with your school leadership. You can help to amplify your own student voices so that they can also take part in the advocacy. Or you can really get out there, get the shirt and get, and take it to the state, right? So, but just knowing what you see and the data that you now have from teachers' voices is to definitely get in a collective. Know that you're not alone.
So one of the areas that I think is just really want to reiterate, the recommendations I think articulate it very, very well. So I would say the 4 recommendations I think are exactly how we need as a community to move forward. And I think one of the points that was made was around the perspectives of CS teachers wanting CS to count as a core requirement. And a bunch of us are working on policy. And I think one of the areas for us to focus in on are both of these recommendations at the same time. So not putting one in front of the other. If we're going to expand access, keeping in mind that I think it's 53% of all high schools across the country are offering computer science. That's just at the high school level. Like, there's still a lot of work to be done on the access point. And so we can't forget about that, because we also really need to recruit, retain, and diversify the pool of CS teachers in order to expand access. So I would say if we can hone in on both of those from a policy perspective, that would be an area that I would like to ensure gets attention.
And then for me, as a teacher, it's going to have to be that ongoing investment on training for teachers, especially with so many things changing in computer science education, new things coming out every year. It's just building that foundation and that connection for teachers is going to be critical as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think, for educators, just remembering to establish community in your classroom, and making sure that when you're thinking about these lessons, you're talking about providing high quality computer science learning experiences. Going back to one of the questions we were talking about before, making it relevant to students is part of that. And if you need to discuss things, in terms of ethical things and stuff like that, to really help students really make that connection, then, don't be afraid, just as Shaina was saying, don't be afraid to do so. And just really knowing and understanding that you do have support, and that's where CSTA can definitely come in, you know, and seek that support if you really need it.
Amazing. Well, I want to say a big thanks to our panelists for joining on and giving context to both the findings and recommendations here. Really appreciate your time. And we're going to work towards closeout. So the panelists covered what are some ideas for how to act on this? And the report concludes with those 5 recommendations we previewed, but each of those recommendations has a lot of details around what actions different stakeholders can take. And these are also, there's a synthesis of like the highest level ones on the webpage as well, which are previewed here. And we've called out 4 key stakeholders: teachers, administrators, policymakers, and curriculum and PD providers. But as David was noting in the chat, it really takes the investment of the entire community. So those informal programs are incredibly important. Family community support, as we heard in the panel, is incredibly important. So it's not just these stakeholders, it is a holistic view. So we're pleased to share an early preview of the report. It is not quite finished yet. We're launching tomorrow. So we're working to put the final touches on the report and the webpage. But you can get your early preview at landscape.csteachers.org. There you'll find the full PDF report. And the little treat is there is this amazing interactive dashboard that Lisa from the Kapor Center developed. It lets you interact with the data. So it summarizes the demographics of teacher, and you can actually filter that data by the state you live in, school income level, the racial diversity of the school, the grade band of it. And when you filter it, it will update the data. What's new this year is we have all these other types of summaries. So we summarize responses to items, and those also update as you filter. So you can look to see what % of teachers in your state have the materials, supplies, and equipment and space necessary to do their jobs. So there is information about resources, their identity, confidence in using identity inclusive computing, and the need for universal CS education. We want to acknowledge the incredible work of computer science teachers throughout the US and the world. This work is only possible because of them, and we're especially grateful to those who completed the survey and gave us these insights. We also acknowledge AiiCE leadership, as well as the research constellation, the teacher-led CSTA policy committee, other staff and collaborators with CSTA and the Kapor Center, our designers, Nicole and Ray, and the National Science Foundation, who's funding the Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education and the activities. And we want to thank all of you. Thank you for being a part and for contributing towards that vision of equitable computer science. We invite you to take action and share the report. Again, the kind of official launch is tomorrow. So you'll see the report update on the same webpage then, but please do share broadly and let us know what you think.